Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are finally reviewing a 32-inch 1440p high refresh gaming monitor that uses IPS technology. This has been one of those monitor categories that really has been neglected by monitor OEMs and panel manufacturers until this year. For some reason, all the focus throughout the ages has been on 27-inch IPS panels, but in the last few months, thanks to a new panel from AU Optronics, we're getting 32-inch 1440p IPS gaming monitors with a decent refresh rate for the first time. The particular variant we're looking at today is the latest high-end display from Asus, the ROG Swift PG329Q. This display packs high-end specifications for this class, including a 32-inch screen with a 2560 by 1440 resolution, 175Hz maximum refresh rate, fast IPS technology, which allows for supposed 1 millisecond grey-to-grey response times, and a huge color gamut that's listed at 160% sRGB. Asus are even including tech such as eLMB sync, adaptive sync that works with all GPUs, even though it's branded as G-Sync compatible, and display HDR 600 certification. While this monitor isn't pushing up to the absolute maximum refresh rates we are seeing these days in 1440p monitors, that is to say 240Hz like in the Samsung Odyssey G7, I think 175Hz is still very respectable given, well, we didn't even have 144Hz IPS options in this size until a few months ago. This is especially good news for people that prefer flat screens, as previously your options were either curved VA monitors or last generation flat VA monitors with more mid-tier to entry-level performance. As a high-end monitor that is part of Asus's premium ROG Swift line, the PG329Q does command an upper-end price tag of $700 US. That is $100 cheaper than the Odyssey G7 32-inch variant, although a few $100 more expensive than today's higher-end 27-inch 1440p displays. This is basically a larger version of a display like the MSI MAG274 QRF-QD, which retails for $550. Design-wise, and this opinion won't surprise people that have been watching my monitor reviews for a while now, I'm not a fan of what Asus puts out in the ROG Swift line. The gamer aesthetic used here is really not my thing, with all the patterns and the huge RGB logo. Doesn't really get me excited at all. I prefer more minimalist designs, although clearly some people do like this look as Asus monitors are pretty popular. One thing is for certain though, and that is this monitor is well constructed. The stand legs are a nice premium metal, and while the screen area is a bit chunky and uses mostly plastic for outer surfaces, it's put together well with no issues or gaps between plastic panels. The stand does offer some flexibility with height, tilt and swivel adjustability. However, I would have liked to see more height available. Even with the display at the maximum height on offer, I feel it sits a bit low. Phaser mounting is possible, but a bit of extra height would have gone a long way. There's no ability to flip the screen around into a portrait orientation either. For ports, we get one DisplayPort and two HDMI 2.0 inputs, plus a 2-port USB hub and an audio output jack. HDMI is limited to 165Hz, so to get the full 175Hz you'll need DisplayPort and to enable the overclocking option in the menu. Speaking of the menu, it's a standard configuration for an Asus monitor with a directional toggle control and plenty of features, including the full gamut of Asus's gamer options like refresh rate displays, timers, crosshairs, and all that good stuff. Alright, let's take a look at response time performance, and as usual, Asus are providing 6 overdrive modes, although in the on-screen display they are listed as variable overdrive, which is good to see. The first 3 modes, so overdrive level 0 through to 2, all feature a different overdrive behavior to the upper 3 modes, and I don't think any of these options are going to be worth using for most people. We see between a 4 and 6 millisecond response time average, with some, but not a lot of overshoot depending on the mode in question. Moving up the overdrive settings does make the display faster, but none are pushing this panel to the limits. It's when we get to overdrive level 3 that things become more interesting. Here the panel is able to deliver an impressive 3.29 millisecond grey-to-grey average, and while there is some overshoot present, it's not enough to be visible in most situations. This is very good performance in the top tier of IPS monitors I've tested, and luckily this is the default overdrive setting. But can we achieve even better results? Not really. Level 4 overdrive is faster again, but has a considerable amount of overshoot, with 58% of transitions exhibiting noticeable inverse ghosting. This means that while clarity does improve somewhat with the 2.7 millisecond grey to grey average, bright trails following moving objects are visible and annoying. It gets even worse at the level 5 overdrive setting, which in my opinion is totally unusable. Keeping with Asus's word that variable overdrive is enabled on this monitor, level 3 overdrive holds up well across the refresh range. At 144Hz we see the most overshoot, but even then it's manageable and delivers a 3.51 millisecond response time average. At 120Hz the monitor is slightly slower, but has reduced overshoot, and this continues as we move down to lower refresh rates. Each step, response times get slightly lower, but this helps to keep overshoot in check and deliver a nice clear experience. Things do get a bit funky at 60Hz, which behaves differently to higher refresh rates, but again, there's no cause for concern here. So as expected, the PG329Q with variable overdrive delivers a single overdrive mode experience that's ideal for variable refresh rate gaming, and even better, it's the default mode. There are lots of additional modes here that might be handy depending on your preferences, such as level 2 that reduces overshoot further if that's problematic in your games, but level 3 is good to go from 175Hz right down to 60Hz. Compared to other monitors on the market, the PG329Q is one of the fastest available. It's not quite as fast as the Samsung Odyssey G7, which is able to deliver very impressive results with the VA panel, but the PG329Q is less than 15% slower. When viewing peak performance, it's also able to come in ahead of most LG Nano IPS monitors like the Dell S2721DGF, albeit with higher inverse ghosting rates. Average performance really is the key here, and the PG329Q performs well. Again, the Samsung Odyssey G7 is the faster display on average, with better tuning allowing it to run at faster response times with similar overshoot on average. But the PG329Q sits neck and neck with the MSI Optics MAG274QRF-QD, which I guess isn't too surprising as they both use the same family of AU Optronics panel. LG's Nano IPS monitors aren't quite as good here. While options like the Dell S2721DGF and LG 27G850 do offer similar 4 millisecond average response times, inverse ghosting rates are higher across the refresh range. The PG329Q better handles lower refresh rates and keeps everything in check nicely. Meanwhile, we do get a much better experience than a lot of mid-range options, like the Asus PG329AQ or VA alternatives like the G27QC. There is definitely a reason to get a high-end gaming display and its response time performance like this. Dark level smearing is a non-issue with the PG329Q as it uses an IPS panel. The Odyssey G7 does a remarkably good job of minimizing dark level smearing with its VA panel, but it does fall short of what an IPS like this can do for dark transitions. As for average error rates, we have a mid-table result here which tends to indicate a nice balanced response time configuration. Asus aren't leaving much performance on the table, but we're not exceeding what the panel is capable of with optimal settings. The PG329Q is also an excellent monitor for 60Hz gaming, only outperformed here by the TN-based HP Omen X27. While 1440p monitors aren't ideal for console gaming, particularly with the PlayStation 5, but also due to a lack of HDMI 2.1, you may be around 60Hz at times with variable refresh rate, so it's nice to confirm that it's a good experience here. Input lag is very good, with below 1 millisecond of processing delay on the monitor's side. When combined with fast response times and a good refresh rate of 175Hz, this is a good responsive monitor to use. However, if esports gaming is more your thing, if you like playing fast-paced games and know you'll be hitting the upper end of the refresh range, then the Samsung Odyssey G7 will give you a class above in terms of input latency due to its higher 240Hz refresh rate. Power consumption is on the lower end of this chart, however most monitors here are 27 inches in size. Compared to the Odyssey G7, the PG329Q is a more efficient monitor with 40 watts of usage when calibrated to 200 nits. The PG329Q supports ELMB Sync, which is Asus's proprietary technology that allows you to use backlight strobing and adaptive sync at the same time. In my testing, this feature works well, but has a limited scope for when it's actually usable. I found the experience was mostly optimal between 144 and 175Hz, with ELMB Sync able to produce a nice clear image with only a limited amount of strobe crosstalk. However, this does only apply to the center area of the display by default, although Asus allows you to change the clarity position in the settings if you need the best clarity at the top or bottom of the screen. The flip side is that ELMB Sync is practically useless at lower refresh rates with terrible strobe crosstalk even at 120Hz. This makes ELMB Sync useful for fluctuations in frame rate in the upper range of the monitor's refresh, but isn't suitable for all refreshes across the entire variable refresh range. You're not just going to turn this on and play Cyberpunk 2077 at 70Hz with perfect backlight strobing. The feature is still primarily for competitive gaming, but with the ability to handle a few frame dips here and there. While ELMB Sync isn't great at lower refresh rates, regular ELMB is also available, provided you are happy to sacrifice adaptive sync. This ELMB mode is much more capable at lower refreshes. While it didn't work at 60Hz, I found it to be capable all the way down to 85Hz. This gives you greater scope for backlight strobing with this display, although again only at fixed refresh rates and capped in-game frame rates. For color performance, the PG329Q is a very wide gamut monitor, delivering the same gamut coverage as we saw from the MSI MAG274QRF-QD. This means that we're getting not only 95% DCI-P3 coverage, but also 100% Adobe RGB coverage, which sums up to be right around the 160% sRGB mark that is advertised on the box. This makes the PG329Q an excellent dual-use monitor for gaming and content creation, with that 100% Adobe RGB coverage especially great for photo editors. Default out-of-the-box color performance is average. My PG329Q unit had a blue tint by default, as seen in the 7318 average color temperature, and slightly worse than average Delta E performance. The sRGB gamma curve also wasn't particularly well adhered to, although this isn't terrible. The major issue that presents itself with the PG329Q is an unclamped color gamut. Because the gamut is so massive and well above sRGB, without any clamping down to sRGB in its out-of-the-box configuration, you will get significant oversaturation by default when viewing sRGB or Rec 709 content. sRGB and Rec 709 are the main color gamuts for most standard content, think web browsing, images, SDR video playback, or even gaming. So most of the time, without any calibration, you will see colors look much more vibrant and saturated than they should be. The biggest issue here is skin tones. Our color checker chart shows the issue. This grouping of test colors are skin tones, and this grouping of white boxes is where those skin tones should be. You'll see these colors are pushed further into the red zone than they should be due to the massive color gamut and the oversaturation problem. What this means in practice is a lot of skin tones looking either more tanned than is natural, or sometimes just straight sunburnt. To me, this is the most noticeable and unsightly effect from oversaturation. There is an included sRGB mode which does a good job of clamping the gamut to sRGB and emulating the color space properly. While Delta E performance here isn't perfect, it's far better than what is seen out of the box. However, there are two fatal flaws with this mode. The first is that you can't change the brightness, so it's stuck on 180 nits, and the second is that you can't change the white balance, so it's stuck with this blue tint. I could perhaps forgive the fixed white balance, but not being able to change the brightness in this mode is just dumb. There is no sensible reason for this, and it makes the sRGB mode useless for a lot of people that like to tune their monitor to specific brightness levels. What if 180 nits is too bright for you? Well, you're kind of screwed because Asus decided to lock out that setting. Theoretically, this should be fixable through a firmware update, but I doubt Asus will change it because they've been doing this sort of thing for ages and seem to think it's a good idea. It's not a good idea, Asus. Please allow the full range of OSD settings changes in the sRGB mode. The only thing I was able to adjust in the regular non-sRGB modes is the grayscale, and while this did improve Delta E performance as is seen here, in practice it doesn't solve the sRGB gamut issue, which is far more pressing. With the full calibration, all of these lingering issues can be resolved to deliver excellent performance for sRGB work and great performance for P3. While I didn't explicitly test Adobe RGB, I would also expect excellent performance there due to 100% Adobe RGB coverage. However, the reason why having an sRGB mode in the monitor is so critical is that ICC profiles like we create for these calibrated results are only supported some of the time. Apps like Photoshop and Chrome do work with color profiles, but many included Windows apps don't, and crucially, many video playback apps, including YouTube within web browsers, also doesn't support the ICC profile. So even with a color accurate profile, you will still see some inaccuracies in certain apps, which is frustrating. The PG329Q has good maximum brightness at 360 nits in the SDR mode, which is fine for most people. Minimum brightness is also fine at 71 nits, coincidentally the same as the Samsung Odyssey G7. The contrast ratio I achieved with my unit was disappointing at below 1000:1. The 32-inch variant of this panel does not have as good a contrast ratio as the 27-inch variant as seen in the MSI MAG274QRF-QD. This makes the PG329Q's contrast only slightly better than that of an LG Nano IPS monitor, which were criticised for low contrast ratios. While I don't think this contrast ratio is awful, it doesn't have great black levels which can impact the viewing experience when gaming in the dark, as one example. Viewing angles are excellent, but uniformity was only average. The outer edges of my PG329Q were visibly different to the centre, which isn't ideal, and this might frustrate those who are sensitive to uniformity issues. I didn't see a ton of backlight bleed or IPS glow, which is a good thing, but still, this is only an average result. The PG329Q is Display HDR 600 certified and does have the hardware for a semi-HDR experience. We see moderate peak brightness capabilities above 600 nits and a very wide colour gamut that allows for a significant increase to saturation. However, the contrast this monitor can produce is poor due to a limited edge-lit local dimming setup with just 16 zones. In practice, these zones are enormous and very visible, stretching from any bright content right to the edges of the panel, which at times can look worse than SDR. Sustained brightness is decent at 650 nits, which allows for good punch in bright scenes. However, one thing I did notice is that the backlight is quite slow to respond to bright changes, so it could be a second or more before the full backlight kicks in, and that's pretty noticeable, especially while gaming. So while the PG329Q is also capable of a 650 nit full flash brightness, the very start of that flash isn't 650 nits in most cases. It might take time to hit that 650 nit mark, which reduces the impact of the flash. This display has a consistent brightness output relative to the window size, at least to some extent, sitting between 650 and 700 nits up to a 10% window. Smaller than that, there is a fall off to 500 nits at smaller window sizes, so the display does lack the top-end punch you get from the best HDR displays. For contrast, there really is nothing good to say here. With local dimming enabled, the backlight does not fully switch off to show a full black image, so the best case contrast ratio that it can do is a mere 82:10:1, which is less than 1/5 of a good target of 50,000:1. Within a single frame, the best case contrast ratio is therefore just 7,150:1, which is somewhat better than the native contrast ratio of below 1,000:1, but is still insufficient for proper HDR playback. Meanwhile, the worst case contrast ratio this panel can achieve is terrible, at just 716:1, below the panel's native contrast. This is due to the visible raised black levels from the large local dimming zones. While in some scenes you will get a better image due to this display's HDR capabilities, such as bright flashes at times, simple scenes with bright and dark areas far apart, vibrant colours, that sort of thing, in others you won't get a better image than SDR, and even occasionally the image will be worse. In that sense, this monitor is semi-HDR, and honestly, I wouldn't factor this into your buying decision. Overall, the Asus PG329Q is a pretty good display that finally brings us something appetizing to the 32-inch 1440p IPS gaming monitor category. While there are some 32-inch high refresh rate VA options on the market, they don't really bring the same thing as a decent high-end IPS. If you wanted something with a flat screen, you typically had to settle for mid-range to entry-level VA response times, and if you wanted good response times, well, your choice is the Samsung Odyssey G7, which is curved and not a great dual-use monitor. The PG329Q offers up something extremely versatile, with the response times to produce a great gaming experience, as well as the flat panel and wide color gamut support that's great for content creation. What I was pleased to see in particular is that there have been very few sacrifices to gaming performance to bring high refresh rates to a 32-inch 1440p IPS panel. We're getting top-end response times here, matching the best I've tested in any IPS monitor, and competitive with the overall best on the market. The 175Hz refresh rate is decent. It's not the fastest you can get, but it should be sufficient for most gamers with today's hardware. This is all complemented by functional backlight strobing, so the PG329Q delivers very good motion clarity and low latency for a responsive, clear gaming experience. This continues to uphold the high standard that is set with Asus's ROG Swift line. The monitors I've tested from this line have all been engineered with top-end gaming performance in mind. Asus have tweaked the variable overdrive to perfection, allowing for a single overdrive mode experience that doesn't leave performance on the table. I didn't see any issues with flickering whatsoever, and Asus continues to offer a great set of OSD features. The panel Asus are using here from AU Optronics has an exceptionally wide color gamut, and that comes with pros and cons. For those that are able to calibrate it properly, the PG329Q is going to have a lot of scope for color accurate work, especially in Adobe RGB. But there are issues with factory calibration and frustrating restrictions to the sRGB mode. With such wide gamuts, having better calibration is more crucial than ever, and both of the first gen 160% sRGB monitors that I've tested have missed the mark in that area. Hopefully monitor OEMs learn a few lessons here and iterate on this for a future design so we can have wide gamuts and nice sRGB accuracy without sacrificing one or the other. There are a few other small annoyances along the way. The contrast ratio and uniformity were unimpressive, although not terrible, and while the HDR mode does offer some small benefits over the SDR mode, the low zone count local dimming is bad. This is basically a high-end gaming monitor for response times, but with a low-end or even below low-end HDR experience. With so few options on the market right now, and with poor availability for monitors, it's hard to say whether the $700 price tag for the PG329Q is justified. There's definitely plenty of stuff to like here and lots of high-end traits, especially on the gaming performance side, but it's also not quite as perfect as I'd like for a high-end monitor, with some of the concerns I've just been talking about. But I guess the most relevant comparison in the high-end market right now is to the Samsung Odyssey G7 32-inch model, which retails for $800. The Odyssey G7 has a higher refresh rate and faster response times, but is a curved monitor with worse uniformity and a lower color gamut, and it's more expensive. The PG329Q is a better choice for those that want the benefits of IPS or don't necessarily need 240Hz and would rather go for a less expensive product. Both products have their fair share of flaws, and ultimately I don't think there's a clear best choice. It'll come down to what features you are after. But it is great to see a solid IPS choice in the 32-inch market, given how neglected this product segment has been for so long. 27 inches is nice, but 32 inches is just that bit more immersive and easier to navigate at times. And as a fan of flat displays over curved displays, this is certainly a display that I'd personally be interested in getting. Anyway, that's it for this review of the Asus ROG Swift PG329Q. Hopefully you've learned everything that you need to learn. If you're interested in supporting the channel and our monitor testing, you can do so via our Patreon or Floatplane pages. Either of those places will give you access to our ICC profiles if you're interested in getting the calibration profiles that we create for these reviews. We also have monthly live streams, Discord chat, all that sort of thing. So yeah, good place to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.